Hello guys, Friday happens to be a Jeep day. Take two. I've attempted to post this video up. I had the phone in a gimbal and then the gimbal ran out of battery and the footage went all over the place. I guess that's the problem with coming to you guys live. They're very tricky to do, as you know, once you make a mistake or words leave your mouth or any other bloopers along the way, there's no way of taking those back. So any mistakes, anything funny on our behalf, have a good laugh. It's all on us. So let's get talking Jeeps. Now today what I'd like to talk about is blower kits on Jeep SRT8s. I've got one here which I'm going to show you in a second. I also want to touch upon dyno readings and differences, because it is important. It is somewhat becoming a little bit blurred over the internet to be able to compare, because dyno figures are meant to be things where we can look at and go, you know, to form a basis of comparison, but that as of late is becoming quite difficult to do, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. So what I'd like to touch upon is how different dynos read different, and hence the only really way to compare cars is perhaps down the quarter mile. The big black dyno, 400 meters long, that never lies. Also another thing today, maybe we'll touch up on a little bit between a Jeep Trackhawk, which is the flagship Jeep, versus an SRT8 with a blower kit, because that might be an interesting one for a lot of people considering this type of thing. Okay, I am going to turn the camera around and yeah, let's take a look at this Jeep. Okay, so we've got a 2013 model Jeep SRT8 Grand Cherokee, 6.4 litre Hemi. These are a pretty cool car. They go very well for an SUV. There's nothing quite like them. They're one of my favorites. Where else can you get a V8 raw sort of muscle packed SUV that sort of goes as well as these, plus the sound, plus the feel? So I guess those of you who've been in one or who own one will know what I'm talking about. Now on this car, here's the story. So we got this one from a gentleman who's bought this Supercharger kit second hand. That's come off a friend of his car who's been to 3 other workshops and they couldn't quite get it right, and in the end sadly he's given up and taken it off the car. So the current owners ended up with it and he's bought it here, and yeah, we've done our best and tried to get this one running properly for him, and yeah, I guess he'll be the judge and see how we go. Now on these are tricky to tune. A lot of places say, I shouldn't say that, I should say more like Holdens, Fords, they're a bit more common. A lot more people know how to tune those, but when it comes to these Jeeps, it is a bit of a specialist thing. Like, it did take us a long time to work these ones out and try to get good results. The problem with them are they're quite different to how other ECUs work, and a lot of people have got, or I should say it's a lot easier to have experience on GMs and Fords because there's a lot more of them, whereas these things are quite rare. So it does pay off when you're getting work done on a Jeep SRT that pick a shop that specializes in these, because they are quite different, and you really need to know the ins and outs and the idiosyncrasies of the computer system to get good results out of these. Okay, so going on a bit more about the Supercharger system and what we've done. This is a Magnuson. It's only running very, very mild boosts. So with this pulley we've got here, it's only getting about 4.5 to 5 psi on this car. Again, the aim here wasn't to make as much power as we can. We just want a good mild upgrade and some additional power to enjoy without stressing the car, so we can still retain it as a daily. You can pass the keys to your wife, or if you like your grandmother or whoever, and they can jump in the car and drive it like it's factory without having to watch out for anything or nurse anything. And lastly, not have any drivability or reliability problems from the driveline and the car itself by running too much power through it. Because that's something we often lose sight of. We get started with power, we add and then add some more and then add some more, and then we look back and we've kind of gone a little bit too far for the car. Too far in the fact that it's now become, there's too many small issues, then it takes the joy out of the car. So it's important to know where to stop with these things. That level changes for everyone else, so you know, I guess it is one thing to keep in mind and keep track of. So all right, I'll fire up the car. Let's have a listen and a look. this one sounds really throaty. Nice exhaust system. I don't know if you guys can hear the blower whine on top of the roar. It does make a nice sound. I'm going to walk around and give you guys a look at this one. Oh, she now belongs in the family. Now she's got this cold air intake kit. I'm not a huge fan of these intake kits. There seems to be a lot of different versions of these. The problem that I find with them is that they sound good with this air filter being exposed, but as far as a cold air intake, because of all these gaps and so on and how they're set up in the engine bay, the hot engine bay heat easily makes its way into the air filter area. So with these cars, when I'm logging them, when I'm at a set of lights, I can easily see 55, sometimes 60 degrees inlet temperature just here at this sensor. So this sensor is right behind the air filter, so the air that's going into the engine and the blower is at 55, 60 degrees. As soon as I move off, the car gets to about 30, 40 k's an hour, temperature sort of goes somewhere near ambient. But if you were to do a launch off the start, you've got all this hot air, it is definitely not going to help in terms of performance. So I tend to prefer those boxes that are sealed up, or ones that actually take the filter over and away from the engine bay area where the heat sources are. Okay, I'm going to turn the engine off so you can hear me hopefully a little bit better. One of the things that I do like about this kit is it's a neat fitment. You still have to trim some of the bits to fit, but it does go together rather nicely. And I also like this pulley setup here. It gets a really good wrap around this blower drive pulley. A lot of the other kits don't quite wrap around as far. And the advantage in doing this is, because it's only a sort of small belt here, 6 rib, you got to be careful, you know, how much you wrap. The more wrap you give, the more grip it gets. And a lot of the high boost, high power blown cars tend to have a much wider belt because of that. If you look at a Trackhawk, again, the belt's, I wouldn't say double the size, but looks, yeah, somewhere near that. And if you were running, say, 12, 13 or 14 psi, with the load on the blower, you really need a much wider belt. I would say for about 8 psi, this works good, maybe 10, but beyond that, it is nice to go to a heavier duty, wider belt that can actually handle the power. Okay, all these blowers, including this one, they come with a heat exchanger at the front. It's like an intercooler. You might be able to see that I'm pointing at it. So with these, they provide some intercooling which sits straight under the blower, between the engine and the blower. So there's some hoses here you can see that basically feed the supercharger cooling water, so that way they're able to reduce the inlet temps, and hopefully, not hopefully, but obviously lower inlet temps, higher the power. Okay, so the questions that get asked on projects like this is, well, how much power does it make and what does it cost? Let's go and take a look at those. So I'm going to walk over to the dyno cell where I've prepared some results from this vehicle, so let's look at those. Okay, here is my power graph from this vehicle. So just so people know what we're looking at and how this all works, we've got on the bottom axis here, to make it easier, I've put engine RPM. I really like to see engine RPM here. A lot of people put road speed, which kind of makes it a little bit hard to compare or at least to see where the engine's revving at. I like to see, where the peak power is. In this case, we're sort of up around the 6.1, 6.2 thereabouts. And yeah, so that's engine RPM along this axis. Now up here we've got power, so we're going from, say, 20 horsepower to 420. The lines up the top, blue one is our before power as the vehicle was standard. Over here she's made about 270 horsepower, and then red one is the after, so we're making just under 380 horsepower there. Okay, so let's talk a bit about power figures, because that tends to be a really hot topic, and it's kind of become a little bit hard to compare power figures. So what I find really useful is actually comparing the power gain, or the before and after. Because if you look at these figures and you look at the internet, there's cars that are sort of making these with really mild mods. And then you'd think, if you see this figure here, a lot of people think, oh, well, what's wrong with that vehicle? You know, how come it's making so little? Well, I must say, this is a little bit on the lower side. For one of these, I typically see maybe, you know, 270, 280 horsepower thereabouts. So it's a little bit lower than usual. And you can sort of see it here where the power comes up and it kind of flattens off, and then it stops gaining power from around this point here, which is 4.5. Whereas if we look at the power curve, it's really, they normally tend to go a bit higher and sort of peak around here, a little bit higher than this. I probably put that down to this vehicle being 100,000 Ks old, maybe this stock exhaust system, and it's also got you know, perhaps old catalytic converters. So again, the power's that's where it was before. So comparing this to the claimed power output, they claim about 460 horsepower from this engine. So we've gone from 460 to 269 at all four wheels. So that's quite a loss when you actually consider it, but I guess that is the real thing, and that is what's really happening. Now, the other thing to keep in mind when comparing figures on the internet and looking at these graphs is some of the dyno figures are actually two-wheel drive mode. So this is all-wheel drive power. So we've got an all-wheel drive dyno here. Here it is a vehicle sitting on here. Now, I have the luxury of being able to run the car both in two-wheel drive mode and four-wheel drive mode. So when I run them in four-wheel drive, because you're spinning extra set of wheels, extra axles, etc., etc., the power is generally at least 10% lower. So this figure of 270, we'll call that 300, or even a little bit more if I was to run just rear wheel drive. The other thing that I find is the gearing and the gears that you choose. So higher the road speed generally tends to rob off more power. So if I do a power run in 5th as opposed to 6th, that again tends to add another 10-20 horsepower. I know this isn't sort of helping comparing, looking at power figures, etc., but I just want to make you guys aware of all these differences, because it is a little bit hard to compare on the internet and doing some research, seeing what mods make what power. It is kind of hard to see and hard to compare. Now, for us as for tuners, does it matter? No, it really doesn't matter to us, because at the end of the day, what we're looking for is not what the actual reading is, how repeatable it is. And here is why that matters. Because all we want to see is, let's say we're starting with 10 apples. We make a change, as long as it goes to 11 apples, we know the change is in the right direction, and we keep going that way. So for us as tuners, the most important thing on the dyno is repeatability. So I should be able to run back-to-back runs without the power changing, with the dyno being repeatable. That way, if I make small changes, I can actually see their effect, and that way I know the tune-up's going in the right direction. I'm not really concerned about what the power, I mean, look, of course I am to some extent, but more importantly, what I want to know is, as a tuner, are the changes I'm making, is it going in the right direction, or am I going backwards? Okay, so going back to this car again and some comparison power figures. So we're at about 269 horsepower from 460. So working off this one, my 376 horsepower then would equate to somewhere around 580 horsepower. So I'm looking at basically the gain here and adding that on, and a little bit more losses going from 460. That would get me to about 580 horsepower. So this engine running only, say, 4.5 psi boost, 580 horsepower, not bad. And I've actually been for a drive on this car. It drives extremely well. And looking at boost on this vehicle, it's 4.5 psi there. I just noted a few things down. It was 4 psi at the beginning. As the blower spins harder, it does, you know, make a little bit more boost. Up the top here, it was actually coming onto 5 psi. So call this number at 5 psi, so a very mild boost. And this is sort of like the stage 1 kit, so you can go more. I guess the trick here is, yes, we can drive the blower harder and make more power, but at the same time that is going to put more strain on everything else. Do we want to do that? Again, comes down to personal preference. If you're just going for all out power, that might be the choice. But if you want to retain, say, more reliability, because whatever you don't make in terms of power, you're banking it as reliability, which is not a bad thing if it's a daily driver, or if you don't want to deal with problems with the car. That's not a bad way to go. Okay, talking about power gains and where the power sits on this car, this is 376 horsepower to the back wheels. I've run Trackhawks on this same dyno just as a comparison. They make about 486 horsepower, so it's another 100 horsepower on top of this. Again, that tends to be a little bit low. I know there's a lot of people out there, and there's a lot of dyno claims, even with stock Trackhawks, showing a lot more. But this is, I guess, on the same dyno. We're looking at gains and changes. Everything's down to the same baseline. I'm trying to give you guys a good idea of comparing cars on the same dyno, because it is very hard to compare cars from different dynos, different places, especially from America. Some of the readings that I see from their dynos, wow, I've never seen anything like that. And they seem to be really on the high side, especially if it's a dyno jet. Don't get me wrong, I mean, as tuners and shop owners, we love dynos that read higher. I mean, I'm going to trade mine in for one that reads a bit higher. It's a lot easier to get paid. Customers are a lot happier to see a higher number, but at the end of the day, it doesn't make the car go any faster. It's just a higher number, I guess, gives the person the bragging rights. But it's I guess at the end of the day, you've still got the same power. It's just the reading that changes. And again, you know, it's, yeah, coming back to these dynos, and why I'm having this conversation is it is a bit blurry comparing power figures and so on over the internet because of these differences in dynos. I kind of wish that they were all standardized, that I wish we all read the same. It'd make it a lot nicer to compare. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Now, I'm finding that on my dyno, compared to a mainline dyno, they seem very similar. If anything, mine seems to be maybe 10% less. And I find that they're actually very close if you turn off all the corrections. So what does it mean, turning off corrections? Well, this is what it means. Dyno essentially just measures the road speed of the car and the torque at the wheels. From that, it calculates how much power it's making. Now, on top of this, into the power equation, then other things get thrown in, such as correction factors. These are going to be things like the ambient air correction, so for temperature, pressure of the day, ambient pressure of the day, and relative humidity. And there's also other corrections that manufacturers put in based on, you know, how hard you're accelerating on the dyno, the weight of the vehicle, or more specifically the inertia of the driveline of the vehicle. So where I'm going with this is that it gets complicated. If we're comparing raw dyno figures, which is quite rare, they seem actually very similar between different brands. So main thing and the takeaway here is, let's compare basically, you know, on the same dyno, the before and after. So what we're looking at here is, you know, car, this is where we were, this is what we gained. It is a substantial gain, and this vehicle is fairly mild boost, and it is, you know, it's one of those things that's sort of set up more around reliability. Okay, so going on, next topic, I just want to discuss a little bit with a blown SRT versus SRT8 versus a Trackhawk. Let's go back over to the car. Now, if money permits, Trackhawks is the pick of the bunch. I mean, we're looking at probably a second-hand prices these days in Australia of about 100,000. They make about 480 horsepower to the back wheels standard. So I wouldn't buy an SRT8 and modify it to make it beat a Trackhawk. That financially doesn't make sense. But where something like this might be suitable for some people is, you can probably set a vehicle up like this for around maybe 50,000. So I'm again comparing used car versus used car, maybe say 60,000. So the comparison that I can draw is perhaps a used Trackhawk for 100,000. You can have one of these, let's say 40,000, and you spend about 20,000 putting your blower on, exhaust, and some tuning, so some basic mods. So again, the $60,000 car here, we're making probably 380 horsepower, and that is very, very mild. So that's 5 psi boost as opposed to Trackhawk's 11. And again, I have run these a little bit harder on the 6.4s, and I've gotten somewhere around, say, 400, 420 horsepower versus the Trackhawk's 480. Again, Trackhawk is unmodified. It's a newer car. There's definitely no comparison if you can afford one of those. But in terms of comparing value, it is not bad. I mean, we're getting somewhere near 400 versus Trackhawk's 4.8. The spend is probably 60,000 total on one of these, as opposed to, say, you know, 100,000 on a Trackhawk. Trackhawk can then be modified further. So yeah, that's definitely the car if you've got the money and you know, you're looking at doing a Jeep, the ultimate Jeep. That's the platform everyone would start with, and everyone should start with. These modifications, these blower kits were you know, around long before the Trackhawks existed, and this is sort of aftermarket's answer to building somewhat a Trackhawk, and then Jeep went and did that for us, which is wonderful. I mean, it's not very often we get cars as good as that. I mean, muscle. They're not really a, you know, sporty thing. Even in the Hellcat and the Challengers, etc., they're more of a muscle car, which no one else seems to be doing. And it's a real niche market that they've captured. It is like a modern hot rod. I really love those. It's a great platform, and thank God we have these Jeeps, and you know, they're still building them, because electric motors, etc., is all coming along. So soon we're not going to have these big capacity big V8s on the road. Things are going electric, and while we can enjoy these cars, well, great. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap up today's video. I've gone on for quite a while now, so any questions or you've got comments, yeah, feel free to shoot some questions under the video. It's great if you actually ask the questions there. That way the answers, other people might be wondering the same, so they can read the answers as well. If you've got any Jeeps or Jeep specific requirements, you're looking at getting some work done with us, yeah, by all means, shoot us a message. Happy to talk to you guys. All right, over and out. Have a good weekend.